Hey, what's up, speedtards? We're starting a new series tonight, the Bonnot Gang series. We're going to be reading through the Bonnot Gang by Richard Perry, the story of the French illegalists. Sitting here with my droogs. We got Many Dog, and we had Lane. He just dropped out. I'm sure he'll pop back in. We're still waiting on Lazardi. Uh, yeah, how's it going, guys?
No, that's a good okay from me. How about you?
Doing good, doing good. How about you, Lane? Are you there?
I'm good.
That's good, that's good. I guess we may as well get into it.
Hopefully, I don't keep getting kicked throughout this. Just
Yeah,
randomly happens.
yeah,
But to be honest, you guys are lagging for me, and so was the music. So
yeah.
that probably has something.
It was lagging for me too. So yeah, I guess I'll get started with the reading. Hopefully, Lazardi shows up um, while I'm reading. But yeah, chapter one. From illegality to illegalism. Property is theft, property is liberty. Pierre Joseph Proudhon, 1809 to 1865. Making a virtue of necessity. Almost all the illegalists who were associated with the Bonnot gang were born in the late 1880s or early 90s into a society completely torn by class division. Above all, it was the suppression of the Paris Commune in 1871 that had consolidated the climate of mutual hatred between the workers and the bourgeoisie. The Commune, a minimal attempt at social democracy by workers and impoverished petty bourgeois, was drowned in the blood of 30,000 people by an army acting on the instructions of the ruling class, infuriated at this challenge to their monopoly of power. The bloody repression of the Commune marked the birth of the Third Republic, and served as a constant reminder to workers that they could expect nothing from this new order except the most brutal repression. The memory of these tragic events of 1871 left a rich legacy in class hatred, one with which French anarchists identified and which they hoped to exploit, with revolutionary organizations outlawed and all forms of working class political activity banned. Anarchists and trade unionists were forced to operate in ways that were clandestine or outrightly illegal. As such modes of behavior became the accepted norm, anarchists acquired a taste for illegality, which lingered on into the 1900s when the Bonnot gang came of age. The 1870s were lean years for revolutionaries, and it was not until the 1880s that French anarchism really took off. The amnesty granted to deported communards in 1880 signaled the return of thousands of hardened revolutionaries from exile in New Caledonia. A strong and fresh impetus was given to the revolutionary movement, and Paris quivered with excitement. According to one police observer, within a couple of years, there were an estimated 40 anarchist groups in France with 2,500 active members, including perhaps 500 in Paris and in Bonnot's town of Lyon. Within a decade, the anarchist press was selling over 10,000 papers a week. Anarchist groups adopted names such as Hate, Dynamite, The Sword, Viper, the Panther of Batignolles, and the Terror of La Ciotat, as an indication of their aggressive stance toward bourgeois society. At the same time, anarchist theory was made more acceptable by proposing the commune as the practical base for the organization of the new society, as opposed to the collective. Need became the new criterion for the distribution of goods and services, which were to be freely available to all, regardless of the work each person had done. Anarcho communism was born. All anarchist activity and propaganda was centered on the class struggle, which was especially bitter and violent up to the mid 1890s. A minor strike in Montsou provoked the burning and pillage of religious schools and chapels, and ended in the dynamiting of churches and managers' houses. Many other strikes involved violent clashes with police or troops, and occasionally coalesced into riots and looting. The anarchist belief in violent direct action, formulated in the policy of propaganda by the deed rather than by the word, reflected the particular bitterness of these struggles. Propaganda by deed was translated into action in three forms: insurrection, assassination, and bombing. The insurrectionary method, which had proved something of a fiasco in Spain and Italy in the 1870s, was not tried out in France. Instead, assassination became the principal weapon of revenge against the bourgeoisie and the figureheads of the state. The first wave of attempted assassinations was directed against political leaders throughout Europe. In the 5 years from 1878, there were attempts on the lives of the German Kaiser, the kings of Spain and Italy, and the French Prime Minister. The killing of the Russian Emperor Alexander II by the people's will was, however, the only successful revolutionary execution of a reigning monarch. There was a hiatus of 10 years until the next batch of attempts on heads of state. In 1894, the French Prime Minister was stabbed to death, and the next decade saw the spectacular demise of the Spanish Prime Minister, an Italian king, an Austrian empress, and a president of the United States. In France, the gap between the two waves of political assassinations was marked by attempts on the lives of upholders of the ruling order, in a more general sense. This time, the victims were employers who had given workers the sack, a wealthy doctor, a priest, and brokers in the Paris Stock Exchange. The bourgeoisie began to be more than a little concerned when the anarchist propagandists by deed began to use dynamite. In 1892, over 1,000 explosions were reported in Europe. In Paris, bombs exploded in the Chamber of Deputies, a police station, an army barracks, a bourgeois cafe, a judge's house, and the residence of the public prosecutor. It was ordinary workers rather than professional activists who carried out these attacks of propaganda. Although such desperate measures were habitually praised in the columns of the anarchist press, the terrorists of the early 1890s were mainly poor working class men, a cabinet maker, a dyer, a shoemaker, for example, unable to get any work, often with a family to support, bitter at the injustice they had suffered, and sympathetic to anarchism. This was one aspect of the world into which most of the illegalists were born. Bonnot was in his mid-teens when the spectacular bombings took place, causing a panic among the bourgeoisie, not to be repeated until he himself became France's public enemy number one. As the anarchist desire for the abolition of the state was translated onto an immediate practical level through individual acts of assassination and bombing, so the wish for the expropriation of the expropriators was reduced to individual acts of reappropriation of bourgeois property. This was the theory of Laprise individual, whose most celebrated practitioners were Clement Duval and Marius Jacob. The infamous Ravachol, who went to the guillotine in 1894 singing the scandalous anti-clerical song Père Duchesne, was no more for his bombings than his burglaries. Clement Duval, twice wounded in the Franco-Prussian War of 1870, spent 4 of the following 10 years in hospital and was rendered permanently unfit for his trade as an iron worker. He was imprisoned for a year after having been caught stealing 80 francs from his employer in order to buy desperately needed food and medicine for his family. On his release, he threw in his lot with the hardened working-class anarchists of the Panther of Batignolles and began a short-lived life of crime. In October 1886, he set fire to the mansion of a wealthy Parisian socialite, having first burgled it of 15,000 francs, but he was caught 2 weeks later, despite wounding a policeman in the course of his arrest. In court, the judge refused to allow him to read his written defense, so he posted it to revolt. Theft exists only through the exploitation of man by man, that is to say, in the existence of all those who parasitically live off the productive class. When society refuses you the right to exist, you must take it. The policeman arrested me in the name of the law. I struck him in the name of liberty. The death sentence was later commuted to hard labor for life on Devil's Island, French Guiana. If Duval worked alone, the next anarchist burglars of note were leaders of gangs which got successfully larger until the the veritable federation of burglars organized by Marius Jacob, Vittorio Pini, an anarchist shoemaker on the run from the Italian authorities, began a series of burglaries with 4 other comrades in and around Paris that netted over 500,000 francs. They stole almost exclusively to support hard-up comrades or prisoners and to subsidize the anarchist press in France and Italy. Ortiz ostensibly dropped out of anarchist politics in order to begin a career as a professional burglar, with a gang of 10 others. He too donated funds to the cause, but not as strictly as Pini had done. He and his men were the only ones convicted at the notorious Trial of the 30 in 1894. The 19 anarchist propagandists went free. Alexander Marius Jacob was really in a class of his own. At 13, he was working on a pirate ship in the Indian Ocean. At 16, he was known anarchist in prison for manufacturing explosives. At 17, he pulled off a remarkable theft from a jeweler's by posing as a policeman. And by the age of 20, he was successfully burgling churches, aristocratic residences, and bourgeois mansions all along the south coast of France. In 1900, age 21, he escaped from prison after feigning madness and went into hiding in Sète. Here he concluded that his previous criminal efforts had been amateur and decided to set up a properly organized anarchist gang to finance both the movement and themselves. They adopted the name of Les Travailleurs de la Nuit, the night workers. Uniforms were acquired for the purpose of disguise and research done into safe-breaking techniques in order that the correct special tools and equipment be obtained. A list of potential targets was drawn up from Who's Who type books, which gave the names of addresses of the rich. Then they set to work. They had no particular base, their field of operations being France itself. Some of their more lucrative burglaries were the cathedral at Tours, an admiral's mansion in Cherbourg, a judge's house at Le Mans, and a jewelry factory in Rue Quincampoix, Paris. Jacob checked out the Cathedral of Notre Dame and the home of Bayeux tapestry, but decided to cross them off his list. He left notes signed Attila, condemning owners for their excessive wealth, and occasionally set fire to mansions that he'd burgled. As the group expanded from its original dozen members, some comrades went off to form autonomous gangs, so that a sort of federation was set up involving anything up to 100 members, but the composition became less and less anarchist. Jacob escaped arrest in Orleans by shooting a policeman, but they caught up with him again in Abbeville. He was taken into custody after a brief shootout, which left one policeman dead and another wounded. Under pressure, one man informed on the whole gang, in such detail that investigations took 2 years to complete, and the charges ran to 161 pages. At the Assai of Amiens in 1905, he was accused of no less than 156 burglaries. Outside, an infantry battalion surrounded the court, and some jurors, afraid of anarchist reprisals, didn't turn up. He was sentenced to forced labor for life and packed off to Devil's Island, where the governor labeled him as the most dangerous prisoner ever. All these leading anarchist burglars donated sums to the cause and defended their actions by saying that they had a right to steal it. It was a question not of gain or profit, but of principle. The natural right to a free existence was denied to workers through the bourgeoisie's monopoly ownership of the means of production. As the workers continued to create wealth, so the bourgeoisie continued to appropriate this wealth. A state of affairs maintained ultimately only by force, but legitimized. It was the immoral bourgeois who was the real thief, both in history and in the present. The anarchist reappropriation was superior in morality. It was part of a rightful restitution of wealth robbed from the working class, done with moral conviction and good, intent to further the cause. As La Revolte commented, Pini never conducted himself as a professional thief. He was a man of very few needs, living simply, poorly even, with austerity. That Pini stole for propaganda purposes has been denied by no one. Anarchist arguments in favor of la prise individuelle had a long history. L'Action Révolutionnaire asked its readers to steal from pawn shops, bureaux de change of post offices, and from bankers, lawyers, Jews, and rentiers. in order to finance the paper. Saira suggested that its readers set an example by applying themselves immediately to relieving the rich of their fortunes. The Libertaire thought that the thief, the crook, and the counterfeiter, in permanent revolt against the established order of things, were the only ones conscious of their social role. In 1905, a contemporary wrote of Pere Pinard, the most spurious of the anarchist papers, with the widest working-class readership. With no display of philosophy, which is not to say that it had none, it played open upon the appetites, prejudices, and rancors of the proletariat, without reserve or disguise. It incited to theft, counterfeiting, the repudiation of taxes and rents, killing and arson. It counseled the immediate assassination of deputies, senators, judges, priests, and army officers. It advised unemployed working men to take food for themselves and their families, wherever it was to be found, to help themselves to shoes at the shoe shop when the spring rains wet their feet, and to overcoats at the clothiers when the winter winds nip them. It urged employed working men to put their tyrannical employers out of the way and to appropriate their factories, farm laborers, and vineyard workers to take possession of the farms and vineyards, and turn the landlords and vineyard owners into fertilizing phosphates, miners to seize the mines and to offer picks to shareholders in case they showed a willingness to work like their brother men, otherwise to dump them into the disused shafts, conscripts to emigrate rather than to perform their military service, and soldiers to desert or shoot their officers. It glorified poachers and other deliberate breakers of the law. It recounted the exploits of olden-time brigands and outlaws and exhorted contemporaries to follow their example. Alongside this shining example of proletarian propaganda came the more intellectual approach of the anarchist theoretician. Elisée Reclus put forward the logical argument of the reprise individual. The community of workers, have they the right to take back all the products of their labor? Yes, 1,000 times yes. This reappropriation is the revolution, without which everything still is to be done. A group of workers, have they the right to a partial reappropriation of the collective produce? Without a doubt. When the revolution can't be made in its entirety, it must be made at least to the best of its ability. The isolated individual has a right to personal reappropriation of his part of the collective property. How can it be doubted? The collective property being appropriated by a few, why shouldn't it be taken back in detail? When it can't be taken back as a whole, he has the absolute right to take it, to steal, as it's said in the vernacular. It would be well in this regard that the new morality show itself, that it enter into the spirit and habit. Men of high principle and exemplary life, such as Elisée Reclus and Sebastian Faure, were so carried away by their convictions on the immorality of property that they were ready to condone virtually any kind of theft on purely theoretical grounds. But the abstract theoretical arguments put forward by these intellectuals were unconnected to their own daily practice. Nevertheless, in the trial of the 30 in 1894, Faure, Grave, Pouchot, and Paul Reclus and others were charged jointly with the Ortiz gang with criminal conspiracy. The propagandists went free and the burglars went to jail. But for Jean Grave, at least, it was a salutary experience, and he determined henceforth to play no part in propounding theories of the validity of theft. The paper that he launched the following year, titled Temps Nouveaux, was soberly written and gained a wide audience in fashionable circles sympathetic to anarchism. Grave saw in crime a corruption that would make people unsuited for the high ideals of a free society. He objected in particular to the type of professional crook, who rather than being a threat to the system, was the mirror image of the policeman, recognizing the same social conventions, with similar minds and instincts, respectful of authority. But if the act of stealing is to assume a character of reivindication or of protest against the defective organization of society, it must be performed openly, without any subterfuge. Grave anticipated the rather obvious objection, but retort the defenders of theft, the individual who acts openly will deprive himself thus of the possibility of continuing. He will lose thereby his liberty, since he will at once be arrested, tried, and condemned. Granted, but if the individual who steals in the name of the right to revolt resorts to ruse, he does nothing more nor less than the first thief that comes along, who steals to live without embarrassing himself with theories. In fact, a new generation of anarchists, spurred on by the individualist ideas of Max Stirner, were to take as their point of departure exactly what Jean Grave objected to, that the rebel who secretly stole was no more than an ordinary thief. The developing theory of illegalism had no moral basis, recognizing only the reality of might. In place of a theory of right, illegal acts were to be done simply to satisfy one's desires, not for the greater glory of some external ideal. The illegalists were to make a theory of theft without the embarrassment of theoretical justifications. All right, we're going to stop there and talk about what we've read so far. So, what are your guys' thoughts on what we've read so far? Welcome, Lizardi, by the way. How's it going, man?
Are you going to speak?
He's muted.
You're muted right now if you're trying to say something. Oh, he's shy.
Yeah. Hopefully he gets his audio working. I can't unmute him. He's muted from his end. So,
Yeah.
Maybe he stepped away while I was reading. We'll be back. Anyways, what did you guys think of what we've read so far?
I liked it.
Yeah.
It sort of talks about how it puts a lot of focus on like how anarchists would moralize these illegal acts.
Yeah.
And that does that to later contrast it with the amoralism of Stirner and the nihilism, where it's just simply doing it for the satisfaction of your ego.
Yeah.
Which in a way is kind of against anarchism. You could argue the same of individualism.
Yeah.
Or at least anarchism proper.
Egoism is a very specific strain of anarchism. So
yeah. And that's where the illegalists end up coming from.
I don't know. I kind of
from this
agree
very
with them,
specific
like,
strain that
they see the bourgeoisie as a parasitic class that steals their labor and like the wealth they produce. That's how they justify robbing banks.
Yeah, it's a lot of this property is their natural right, so they rob and they view themselves as like these Robin Hood type figures.
Yeah, and like they aren't stealing for self-gain either. Like they're stealing from the bourgeoisie and then using it to fund their revolutionary
We donate it to
organizations.
anarchist cause, or we'll give it to fellow anarchists, or
Right.
people just in need. Like I said, Robin Hood type figures.
Yeah. This is the concept of propaganda of the deed sounds familiar too.
It is. It's a common anarchist concept. An example would be Ted Kaczynski, where you do these very extreme acts to sort of get the propaganda out there. It's free publicity.
Yeah.
I find it kind of surprising, like how many like high members of like royalty they try to assassinate. But I don't really hear much about that.
Yeah, you don't hear much about it. For example, there were quite a few like anarchist terrorist attacks in the 1920s in America, but they'll focus more on lynchings.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, those anarchists will get like a footnote or a paragraph in our history books.
I would draw parallels with like the current year white nationalist movements. Like we have all these lone wolf shooters like Dylan Roof or Brenton Tarrant. Like that's kind of propaganda of the deed too, though. Like these acts of violence to kind of
that's exactly the point.
Which I can't really co-sign those.
I use the example of Ted Kaczynski.
Yeah, like these anarchists were going after targets that actually mattered, like not random civilians who are unarmed praying at church or something.
And they often help civilians. So it's actually more respectful. And it also reminds me of like, there was this anarchist, I think it was in the 80s, who took a news station here in like Utah. I think it was somewhere down south. You can find the video clip. It's actually nice to watch.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that.
He just pretty much gave himself an interview. I'll send it to you.
All right. Yeah, I'm not
The full
familiar
video
with
is actually hard to find. I found it like on Yahoo, but it's hard to find the full interview.
Yeah.
But the story there is he also killed his girlfriend, and he had nothing to do with his life. So he took this news station, then told everyone to leave, and then he did a shootout and died with the cops.
Yeah.
The only people really harmed there were him and the police.
James says Jesse James was an illegalist. The panel's thoughts on Jesse James?
Meh.
I don't know much about him, to be honest.
Woody Guthrie has that song about Pretty Boy Floyd, the bank robber. Like it's got that classic line: "You say that I'm an outlaw, you say that I'm a thief, but here's Christmas dinner for the people on relief." That gives me a very strong illegalist vibe. It's in the same strain as of thought as the French illegalists and the Bonnot gang, in my opinion. What are other lines from that song? In this world I ramble, I've seen lots of funny men. Some will rob you with a 6-gun, some with a fountain pen. Yeah, classic line. I like Woody Guthrie. He was not a fascist at all. He was an anti-fascist. He famously had "This Machine Kills Fascists."
He was a communist.
Yeah, written on his guitar. He made that album about Sacco and Vanzetti, though. I like that album a lot.
I actually learned how to play harmonica from a Woody Guthrie songbook.
Nice. I didn't know you played harmonica.
When I was like, I haven't done it in forever, and I don't own one. So
yeah.
It was like when I was 8, I won.
Based. I don't know. I like American folk music. It's good tunes. So, Lizardi, is your mic working yet?
Yeah, I think so.
Hey, Lizardi, what's up?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, what's up?
Welcome to the podcast, man. It's great to have you on.
Yeah, thanks. It's really cool to be here.
Yeah. So, do you have any thoughts on the opening section of chapter 1 that I just read? He talks about like propaganda of the deed, the trial of 30, and how like these like outlaws were like Robin Hood like figures. They rationalized stealing from the rich, making a virtue of necessity. Like they felt like the bourgeoisie was stealing their labor and their wealth, and that's how they justified stealing from the rich. Do you have any thoughts on these early illegalists?
Yeah, I think you could say that the legalists are somehow motivated by a sense of honor. No, that's the main difference between the legalist and the like the regular criminal. So yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah, their motivation isn't self-gain. Most of the money they steal goes to other anarchist organizations to publish their newspapers. It goes back into the struggle. So there's a selflessness to their illegality.
Yeah. There was this Colombian anarcho-individualist, Biófilo Panclasta, who proposed to assassinate all the kings of Europe in the same day. So I remember that when you told about like the idea of killing these aristocrats and stuff. So yeah, that's kind of like the modus operandi of illegalists. But well.
Yeah, for sure. They were definitely going after big targets too. Like they were trying to get rid of monarchists and like the president, the king. They weren't going
people that they have
after,
filled
like,
have wronged society.
Yeah, they weren't going
not
after
just random people,
random civilians. So I don't know. I do think there is like a sense of honor to this kind of behavior. I mean, if you want to make an omelet, you got to crack some eggs. So it is what it is. But yeah, I think we've said everything there is to say. Does anyone have any final thoughts on that opening section before I read St. Max?
No.
Okay, so we're going to get into Max Stirner, part 2 of chapter 1, St. Max. With the dawn of the 20th century, a new current arose within French anarchism, self-conscious anarchist individualism. The main intellectual base for this new departure was the rediscovery of the works of the much maligned and neglected philosopher Max Stirner. Karl Marx himself had not underestimated the radical nature of Stirner's challenge, and in the German ideology directed a most vicious polemic against him and his affirmations of egoism. But Stirner's book, The Ego and Its Own, although causing a great stir at the time, was soon forgotten. In France, interest was only reawakened around the turn of the century due to a conjunction of two main factors: the current fad for all things German, rather ironic considering the relative proximity of the First World War, and the keen interest in individualist philosophy amongst artists, intellectuals, and the well-read, urban middle classes in general. One indigenous bourgeois individualist was Maurice Barrès, who wrote an acclaimed trilogy entitled Le Culte de Moi, in which, having observed that our malaise comes from living in a social order inspired by the dead, depicted a new type of man who, in satisfying his ego, would help turn humanity into a beautiful forest. Despite such apparent sentimentality, his individualism was based upon the privileged material position of the bourgeoisie, whose self-realization was only made possible by the subjugation of the desires of the masses. Barrès ended up in later years as an anti-Semitic Christian nationalist. Individualism gained more radical currency through Henrik Ibsen, the Norwegian writer, who produced critiques of contemporary morality in dramatic form. He developed the theme of the strong individual standing alone against both the tyranny of the state and the narrow-minded oppressive moralism of the masses. Ibsen's appeal lay in the fact that personal longing for independence existed at all levels of society, so anybody, regardless of their class origin, would identify with the individual who was opposed to the mass. But Ibsen's individualism addressed moral questions rather than economic ones. In the fad for all things German, Friedrich Nietzsche was the most fashionable of the writers come philosophers. He railed against the prevailing culture and ethos of his time, and especially against attitudes of conformity, resignation, or resentment. He willed the creation of the Superman, who would break through the constraints of bourgeois morality and the artificiality of social conventions toward a rediscovered humanity of more primitive virtues. For the record, he was neither a nationalist nor an anti-Semite. Nietzsche regarded Stirner as one of the unrecognized seminal minds of the 19th century, a recommendation which, coupled with the aforementioned vogue for German philosophy, resulted in Fin de Siècle, publication of extracts of his work in Le Mercure, and in the symbolist organ of literary anarchism, Entretien politique et littéraire. In 1900, the year of Nietzsche's death, the libertarian publisher Stock printed the first complete French translation of Stirner's work, entitled L'Unique et sa propreté. Sorry for the French pronunciations, guys. I'm trying my best. Anyway, young anarchists in particular quickly developed a fascination for the book, and it rapidly became the Bible of anarcho-individualism. Stirner's polemic was much more extreme than the well-worn ideas that until then made up the stuff of revolutionary ideology. Anarchist thinkers had tended, like Proudhon, to conceive of some absolute moral criterion to which people must subordinate their desires in the name of reason or justice, or like Kropotkin, they had assumed some innate urge which one authority was overthrown, would induce people to cooperate naturally in a society governed by invisible laws of mutual aid. The anarchism of Tolstoy and Godwin was also thoroughly grounded in moralism, a throwback to their Christian backgrounds of respectively Russian Orthodoxy and English descent. Even anarcho-syndicalists such as Jean Grave, had a revolutionary morality, which viewed the class struggle as a just war. Stirner saw all morality as an ideological justification for the repression of individuals. He opposed those revolutionaries who wished to set up a new morality in place of the old, as this would still result in the triumph of the collectivity over the individual and lay the basis for another despotic state. He denied that there would be any real existence in concepts such as natural law, common humanity, reason, justice, or the people, more than being simply absurd platitudes, which he derisively labeled sacred concepts. They were some of the whole gamut of abstract ideas which unfortunately dominated the thinking of most individuals. Every higher essence, such as truth, mankind, and so on, is an essence over us. Stirner perceived the repressive nature of ideologies, even so-called revolutionary ones. He believed that all these sacred concepts manufactured by the intellect actually resulted in practical despotism. For Stirner, the real force of life resided in the will of each individual, and his ego, the unbridled I, could not come to real self-fulfillment and self-realization so long as the state continued to exist. Each individual was unique, with a uniqueness that should be cultivated. The egoist's own needs and desires provided the sole rule of conduct. Differences with other individuals were to be recognized and accepted, and conscious egoists could combine with others into a union of egoists, free to unite or separate as they pleased, rather than being held together in a party under the weight of some ideological discipline. Certain conflicts of the will might have to be settled by force, as they were already in present society, but these should be done without the need for moral justification. Stirner saw desire as the prime motivating force of the will. My intercourse with the world consists in my enjoying it. My satisfaction decides about my relation to men, and I do not renounce from an excess of humility, even the power over life and death. I no longer humble myself before any power. The realization of individual desires was to be the basis for the elimination of the state. For what was the state ultimately but the alienated power of the mass of individuals? If people reappropriated their power habitually, surrendered to the state, then established society would start to disintegrate. In the struggle against the state, which every conscious egoist would be forced to engage in, Stirner distinguished between a revolution, which aimed at setting up an immutable new social order, and rebellion or insurrection, a continuous state of permanent revolution, which set no glittering hopes on institutions. Stirner's rebellion was not so much a political or social act, but an egoistic one. Furthermore, in this battle with the state, Stirner felt that an ego who is his own cannot desist from being a criminal. But this did not mean that a moral justification for crime was necessary. Discussing Proudhon's famous dictum, property is theft, he asks why. Put the fault on others as if they were robbing us, while we ourselves do bear the fault in leaving the others unrobbed. The poor are to be blamed for their being rich men. He suggested that Proudhon should have phrased himself as follows: there are some things that only belong to a few, and to which we others will from now on lay claim or siege. Let us take them. But one only comes into property by taking, and the property of which for the present we are still deprived came to the proprietors likewise only by taking. It can be utilized better if it is in the hands of us all than if the few control. Let us therefore associate ourselves for the purpose of this robbery. He summed up, to what property am I entitled? To every property to which I empower myself. I do not demand any right, therefore I need not recognize any either. What I can get by force, I get by force. And what I can get by force, I have no right to, nor do I give myself airs or consolations with my imprescriptible right. Liberty belongs to him who takes it. Stirner proposed expropriation not as the legitimate response of a victim of society, but as a way of self-realization. Pauperism can be removed only when I as an ego realize value for myself. When I give my own self value and make my price myself, I must rise and revolt to rise in this world. Yet he seemed unsure as to whether a rebellious crime should be glorified or superseded. In crime, the egoist has hitherto asserted himself and mocked the sacred. The break with the sacred, or rather of the sacred, may become general. A revolution never returns, but a mighty, reckless, shameless conscienceless, proud crime, does it not rumble in distant thunder? And do you not see how the sky grows presciently, silent, and gloomy? Elsewhere, in his less poetic moments, Sterner was more pensive. Talk with the so-called criminal as with an egoist, and he will be ashamed, not that he transgressed against your laws, but that he considered your laws worth evading, your goods worth desiring. He will be ashamed that he did not despise you and yours altogether, that he was too little an egoist. These seemingly contradictory attitudes were later to be keenly felt by those of the illegalists. The ego in its own was a starting work, written from a point of view that might be called radical subjectivity, a work of an all-consuming passion best, summed up in the egoist battle cry, take hold and take what you require. With this, the war of all against all is declared. I alone decide what I will have. If socialists continually ignored the question of individual desires and the subjective element of revolt, then it must be said that Sterner made little effort to direct his attention to basic socio-economic questions and the need for a collective struggle of the dispossessed, which would realize each individual's desires. He saw the masses as full of police sentiments through and through, and reduced the social question of how to eliminate the state and class society to an individual one to be resolved by any means. Still, he had at last made it possible for rebels to admit that their revolt was being made primarily for their own self-realization. There was no need to justify it with reference to an abstract idea. Those who claimed to be acting in the name of the people were often sentimental butchers. Sterner stripped away the dead weight of ideology and located the revolution where it always had been, in the hearts and minds of individuals. The force and vigor of Sterner's ideas appealed to many anarchistic spirits, determined to live the revolution there and then. The long association of French anarchism with theoretical voluntarism and practical illegality, sympathy for working class criminality, and hostility to bourgeois morals and socialist politics meant that Sterner's ideas were easily accessible to many anarchists, not yet blinded by an ideologically pure anarchism. In contrast to the latter, the new generation of anarchists felt it necessary to call themselves anarchist individualists, although they saw themselves as upholding the banner of anarchism, pure and simple. This milieu, which emerged after 1900, and which was largely Libertad's creation, was one that had already assimilated Sterner's basic ideas into the body of its theory by the time of the Bonnot gang. It is quite possible that none of the gang had ever actually read The Ego in its own, but their actions and Sterner's theories were to have striking similarities. So here's a picture of Comrade in plein air, a forerunner of the renowned anarchist picnic, a gathering of the Causeries Populaires sometime between 1905 and 1908. Libertad on the left of the picture with walking stick and beard is flanked by his lovers, the MAHE sisters, Anna and Amandine. So yeah, thoughts on Sterner?
Like,
CSD is after.
Yeah,
Okay, I'll let go, man.
Welcome to the stream, CSD.
Hello, glad I can make it. Sorry for being late.
No problem.
no,
No
that's
problem.
cool.
Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, is there if I say a short poem written by Engels about Sterner?
Yeah, go ahead.
All
Sure.
right, so this is written by Engels on during a meeting with him and a group of other left intellectuals, including Sterner. And Engels writes, "Look at Sterner, look at him, the peaceful enemy of all constraints. For the moment he is still drinking beer, soon he'll be drinking blood as though it were water. When others cry savagely down with the canes, Sterner immediately supplements down with the laws also. Sterner full of dignity proclaims, you bend your willpower and you dare to call yourselves free? You become accustomed to slavery. Down with dogmatism, down with the law." And I think that that poem by Engels definitely shows that Stirner was not playing around even in real life with his philosophy.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Like Stirner's like the definition of what most people think of when they hear the word anarchist. Same thing with the
Well, he never
illegalists.
called himself an anarchist.
He only
Yeah,
just
I
said
know.
he was an
I'm
egoist.
just saying
He
he's
wa-
like the definition of what people think of when they
Yeah.
hear the word anarchist.
When you're average normie. But here's the
Yeah.
thing that's interesting is that he's actually extremely influential. Like even Carl Schmitt lost sleep because of him, supposedly.
Apparently, Ebola took influence from him as well.
Yeah. Evola took influence in before he tried to commit suicide. Then he got on that traditionalist stuff.
Yeah. Then
Evola was more into that when he was He was also into Oscar Wilde and a few other people.
Yeah, the decadent literary movement.
Mhm.
That D'Annunzio was also part of. I think he took a lot from Stirner as well, as did Ernst Jünger.
Mhm.
Especially
Yeah,
in this
Ernst
concept
Jünger's
of the,
branding of the anarch is a sort of a rebranding and a modification of the unique.
yeah, for sure.
I also find it interesting how the illegalists' origins starts with the working class movement, like the radical
Of
elements of the
course it
working.
does.
Am I cutting out?
No,
No, you're not cutting out. I just said, of course it does.
Yeah, and how it evolved past that, and how it doesn't even do itself a part of that movement anymore.
Well, Stirner hated the working class, which is why, like, the modern followers of him call themselves post-leftist
yeah,
for a lot of the same reasons.
I do get a sense of like elitism in Stirner that doesn't exist in like Proudhon, for example.
It wouldn't exist in any other anarchist. This is also why I say it's in a way it's like anti-anarchism, because you have no reason to object to your own authority. So you take power, you can subjugate anyone. That's like the opposite of anarchism.
Yeah. Fat Elvis thinks this is appealing. Shout out to Fat Elvis. He was in our last live stream too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Lizardi, what are your thoughts
I
on
the
Stirner?
distinction about anarchism proper, which is a moralistic view, versus egoism.
Yeah.
Right.
Lizardi, do you have any thoughts on Max Stirner?
Yeah, well, I think the problem with Stirner is that he is culturally hijacked by anarchism, but in reality, his philosophy is apart from political ideology. Like Mussolini was also really interested in Stirner's work when he was younger. And yeah, also Ebola takes his example for the concept of the absolute individual. So yeah, you can do whatever you want with Stirner ideas. It is the
Yeah,
yeah it sorry, I don't know how to say it. Like it's not conditioned to political ideas.
it's not specific to egoism itself. You can take multiple views from it. That's what you're trying to say?
Yeah, exactly. Thanks.
Yeah.
But yeah, like pretty much everyone. I even mentioned Carl Schmitt. Not only that, he lost sleep. There was one guy, I'm trying to remember, he's a Jewish occultist philosopher. Oh, Rudolf Steiner. He took a lot from Steiner, but ended up rejecting it because he felt it was a dead end philosophically, which it kind of is.
What was his? Why did he view it as a dead end?
Well, where do you go from that? There's just nothing. There's meaning. There's no
Well, I
meaning,
mean,
just
I-
pure
I-
nihilism.
Yeah, no, I just was curious what his opinions were.
Mhm. And that was from Rudolf Steiner.
Yeah, I'd have to agree that it is. You can't really build a society off of that ideology, and you're
Yeah,
not.
I also disagree with how he understands the development of individuals, because he views the individual as isolated, as alone, whereas you develop yourself in relation to other individuals, and you're defined entirely by collectives. Like, try to describe yourself without relating yourself to some collective. For example, like your occupation, your name. I guess your name works, but that doesn't really tell me anything about you. Like
Yeah.
I am a white Anglo-Saxon American. That is me. It's in relation to collectives. You can't define yourself any other way. Really.
Yeah, I do think that like individualism as an end in itself, like individuals need collectives and like they desire this. What are your thoughts on the union of egoists? Because like that is kind of a
Well, it sort
collective.
of becomes a collapsing concept if you take it to the next step. Because what's the next step from the union of egos but civil society and collectives,
Yeah,
which
it's like
destroys the thing
it's individuals
and
who
destroys egoism.
voluntarily. Yeah, it's like individuals who decide to come together and like work towards shared goals based on like shared interests. It's completely
And anyone
voluntary,
can
though.
leave. You can't force anyone into it.
Yeah.
Can't
To
force
be,
anyone into it. You can't really set rules, and it just goes.
yeah, to be honest, I do kind of try and organize Futurism Forever as along the lines of like a union of egoists rather than like a
I've said
formal
that many
group.
times.
But I don't know. It has mixed results. Sometimes I try and impose rules and nobody follows them. So it's just kind of like the way things end up happening. I don't know.
It's its own thing. It runs itself.
Yeah.
You're the head of it.
By default, I'm the head because like I don't know. Old man Gio's trying to get people to follow rules and shit, and it never works out though. So depending on my mood, sometimes I just let things like go the way they're naturally gonna go. Sometimes I try and get people to do things, and it has never worked out though. I'm not taken seriously as like an authoritarian figure. So I organize the podcast and the YouTube channel, but everyone in our group is kind of like a free spirit. They want to do their own thing. So, you know, I kind of just,
beautiful in that way.
yeah. I don't know. It is kind of anarchistic too, which I'm fine with. Sometimes it can be frustrating when I want somebody to do something and they just don't want to cooperate. But, you know, it's all good. It's all good. We got a comment from Fat Elvis. It sounds appealing in a different life or for someone that's not me. LOL. I'm way too squishy to even consider that type of approach to life.
Then maybe you should harden up.
No, I mean the entire point of egoism is that it's dependent on your own ego. So if you don't want to be aggressive or violent, like that's up to you, dude.
Yeah, but you're probably gonna get fucked.
Yeah, like if you live in an egoistic society, you probably get fucked. But you know, maybe you like that. I don't know.
I'm not
Sounds
Something
like
in
I can't
really
Spanish.
bad.
You're the only one who understands it, Lizardi.
Yeah, that's Juan though. Or Manuel, as he's imagined himself this evening. I think he's just saying hi to Lizardi. I don't speak Spanish, but saludos means salute, I guess.
Sí, sí. Saludos a Salvador.
Yeah. Well, you got fans in the chat, so it's too bad Juan couldn't come on tonight. I like that. I like having him on.
Invasion and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's chapter 1 of the Bonnot gang. We're going to be doing this series every
Just sort
2
of setting
weeks.
the mood.
Yeah, that's like chapter 1. It's just introducing like the main ideological currents of what would influence the Bonnot gang, the social climate. It's post-Paris Commune. All these groups are like have been outlawed by the state, so like they're kind of illegalist by necessity.
Can I add something real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
Something to note around this time period, Marxism took a more reformist route, and the radical elements that we knew like in the 1920s and all the way up to the 1990s didn't take root until then. So most of the working class radicals went to anarchism.
Yeah.
Like
After
anarcho-syndicalism,
Marx's
for
death,
example.
Engels went to peaceful revolution.
Yeah, and his followers afterwards, like Bernstein and Karl Kautsky.
Yeah. And one of them ended up becoming a liberal.
Wasn't that
Forgot his
Bernstein?
name, though.
Like
No,
Edward
not Bernstein. Maybe it was Bernstein. I don't remember. One of them became a liberal and ended up supporting the Nazis because they thought they were defense for capitalism.
Oh,
He
that's
spoke
interesting.
pretty heavily to Engels, though.
Yeah, but
I'll
Mises
send
also
you an
thought that
article on
fascism.
Marxist.org on him.
Are you sure it wasn't a Kotsky?
Maybe it was. I can't remember the names right now. So
Wait, it was Hayek. Yeah, it was Hayek that thought fascism was going to defend capital too.
and they supported them because of it.
Yeah, until like fucking years later when it was like, no, they were Marxists, which is like weird. Now I don't know how
Yeah.
you can like.
He was a
switch.
weird guy too. Just his whole evolution was weird. Bizarre.
Yeah. So, if no one has does anyone have final thoughts before we wrap up?
It's
I'm-
interesting. I'll say that. It's not something I would follow, but I see a lot of problems with it, but it's nevertheless interesting looking back
Been
at it.
enjoyable. I like reading it.
I do see parallels in like the American like white nationalist movement, particularly with the group The Order, who like also robbed banks and like used propaganda of the deed. And I don't know if they were directly influenced by like French illegalism, but I do think it had its influence, at least subconsciously,
Mhm.
on
Mhm.
and yeah, like I mentioned earlier, the Brenton Terrence, and yeah, you definitely see.
Well, I don't think
propaganda of
most
the deeds
acts
going
that
on.
you could call as propaganda by deed were really intellectualized
No,
the same way. I don't think that they read history and found, oh, you got all these anarchists committing terrorist attacks. I should do the same.
they reached
Yeah,
the same
sometimes
conclusions
they,
though. Um,
Yeah, they reach the same conclusions independently.
yeah, a lot of times they start doing like a lot of these radicals do. A group start doing illegal acts out of like necessity to keep their operations going. Like for instance, like the FARC rebels and ELN in Colombia, drug traffic
Mhm.
to keep their rebellion going.
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, you got to do what you got to do, and like movements need funding. If you don't have like an elite who's bankrolling your revolutionary movement, then you kind of have to take it upon yourself to fundraise and make money. So
Mhm.
taking from the rich to fund your revolutionary movement is pretty based, in my opinion. Yeah, I'd
It's
say,
honorable. A lot more honorable than just stealing or taking from random civilians.
yeah, and it's better than stealing from civilians for self gain. That's totally selfish.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and like, yeah, we do not promote criminal activity at Futurism Forever, but we're
But we're not Fed posting right now. We're just saying that's more respectful than
Yeah,
another option.
yeah, no, I don't agree with like for the record, I don't agree with FARC and ELN selling drugs. No, I condemn them on that issue.
Also, I think the entire like black market as a form of praxis is kind of retarded.
And there's those ANCAPs that believe it's based. But now, yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I guess that's a good place to wrap up. This is going to be a continuing series, so we'll be back in 2 weeks ish and read and discuss chapter 2. So hopefully people enjoyed this debut.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks everybody for coming on.
See you all.
Yeah,
See ya.
salute.
Salute.